and welcome to Random Encounter 342 or 342. My name is John O'Logan, and hey, so remember when I was, getting sick in the last episode, and I said I have kind of a sore throat? Well, it turned into a somewhat mild head cold, sore throat, congestion, headache, vague sick feeling. Nothing major. I was sick for about 5 days. It was, however, the first time I've actually been sick with like a virus in 6 years pre-pandemic. I've been sick, but for other reasons. But like this was like the first, oh no, I caught something in years. But all in all, it was pretty mild. Amanda, on the other hand, caught it a few days after I did, and she's been insanely sick for the last 10 days. She's just getting better, and it's really weird because it only took me like 5 days to get better, and she's usually the healthy one, and I'm the one with an immune system that's like a wet piece of tracing paper. I just get, I was a real sick kid, so like my immune system just folds instantly. If my immune system had like a royal flush, they'd look at the virus across from them and be like, fold. But Amanda usually is just like holding strong, but it's been real stubborn. But however, I am mostly fine now, give or take a few coughs. So I'm super excited to talk about a couple of excellent games that have come out in the last few weeks, along with some news that we're going to talk about later on. And I might share some thoughts about a game that I just finished that came out a few months ago. So joining us today are Bob.
Hi.
And Ben.
Hey.
All right. Well, let's start talking about a game that it's kind of a visual novel. It's a very unique looking game, and it's a sequel. And that is Paranormasight, The Mermaid's Curse. So this is actually a new franchise, the Paranormasight franchise. It started in, I think, March of 2023 with the Seven Mysteries of Honjo. Bob, you reviewed that. We'll talk about that in a second. It has a very distinct visual identity. Its character designs are by Gen Kobayashi, primarily known for his work on The World Ends With You, those wonderful DS-era Square Enix RPGs. And it's a very interesting visual style. It's kind of like 1980s visual supernatural elements. We'll get into how it looks in a minute. It was a big enough success that we get a standalone sequel in The Mermaid's Curse. And it has a real focus on historical accuracy with, obviously there's no such thing as mermaids, but like built into that. So, Bob, like I said, you reviewed the original title a few years ago. How do you feel about the original?
Oh, the original is outstanding. It was a breath of fresh air. And, when you review as many games as we do here at the site, anytime a game departs from the pack and introduces some new ideas stylistically and substantively, I'm all about it because there's so many games that piggyback on one another. And the visual novel genre is nothing new, but the way Paranormasight approaches visual novels with a occult mystery-esque sort of atmosphere set in the 80s, so authentically, it feels distinct from every other visual novel that's basically available.
I've not played these yet. I actually have wanted to for quite some time, but something I really love about setting a game in the 1980s or the 90s or before is that as a storyteller, it removes the crutch that is a cell phone or like immediate access to all information. Like as a player, I guess, or if you're watching a movie, like the protagonist actually needs to work harder to get in contact with people or to find out information in a way that is more dramatic than literally just pulling out your phone and having the world at your fingertips.
And what I like about that is they play so straight because it's not one of those things where it's like, well, golly gee, I guess I'll have to use this landline telephone. It's just like so serious, and it doesn't draw attention to the fact, hey, this is the 80s. We're waving our hands up in the air. This is the 80s. It's just, you take it at face value and you kind of just get sucked into this world, and you don't even think about smartphones. You don't think about computers or laptops or anything like that. It's just, the characters are dealing with what they're dealing with, and you're along for the ride.
It exists in the 1980s, and you can actually see that in the screenshots of the game because there is like a CRT filter over top of the actual graphics.
Yes. And I actually, in a lot of games, especially games that try and draw from a retro vibe, they'll have CRT filters, scan lines, and you can like check some boxes in the options menu and then do that stuff. I tend not to check those boxes. I feel like they're kind of like a cheap way to get someone into the visuals of the game. I like to take these games at face value with how the developer intended them to be digested. But here in Paranormasight, I think it works so outstandingly well. One, because they don't draw too much attention to it. It just is the way it is. And it adds to that 80s vibe, which makes it, more authentic, not just in terms of, the fact that they're using landlines and, the news of the era and the history of the era, but also the visuals. So you get really drawn into this world from multiple perspectives, which I think just enhances the vibe.
Well, let's shift the focus over to Mermaid's Curse now, which, as with the previous one, it does bring back the 1980s setting. It uses like washed out colors, the CRT filter. And there's not one single protagonist in this game. There's a variety of different protagonists.
Yes. So they tell you straight out. So the storyteller is one of the core features of the Paranormasight series, I guess, at this point. And he introduces the kind of story that you're going to be into. He's talking to you as the player, kind of breaking the fourth wall. And he says, you're going to be taking on the perspective of Yuza Minakuchi. And he's basically a teenage boy who comes back to his home in Kamishima. And the storyteller tells you, all right, this is from his perspective, which is an interesting thing to say, because very quickly after you start the game, you start taking on the perspective of other players as well. I'm sure this is on purpose. I don't think it's a developer oversight. It's kind of like, who's the protagonist here? And is this a reliable protagonist? Who's really telling the story? And the fact that this leans so much on history, it's like, who's writing the history? Whose perspective is this really from? Are we really following these Americans, or are we following Yuza the whole time?
Who are some of the other characters?
So you have Avi, who's an American fantasy author, and he's very distinct from the other characters. The cast of characters is very unique from one another, and he is kind of like a goofy character, but he also is kind of serious. He wants to find a mermaid. That's kind of his ambition in life right now, so he can write a fantastic story about mermaids. And then you have...
He's going to get scooped by the Little Mermaid in 1989. Just heads up for him.
Well, and to depart a little bit, they do reference the Little Mermaid a bit. And actually, they don't reference the Disney movie as much. They reference the novel that the Disney movie was based on.
Well, yeah, it came out at... Actually, I pulled that number completely out of my ass. Did the Little Mermaid come out? I'm pretty sure the Little Mermaid came out in 1989. It did. Thank God, my brain has retained useless Disney knowledge.
So I'll get to the more mermaid stuff later on. But then you also follow Yumeko Shiki, who is this game's agent from the Paranormal Affairs Bureau. And those who have played the first game, you also got to play as someone from the Paranormal Affairs Bureau. So it's one of the other central themes of the Paranormasight formula. And so you get to take on, and you also have a teenage girl who, for unknown reasons, just hangs out at a guy's house and watches TV all day. She doesn't go to school. She doesn't have a job. She just kind of shut up a few months ago. What's her story? But she's friends with Yuza and the teenagers that you follow throughout most of the game. So you shift storylines over the course of the game. And I think the game presents as if, hey, you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, follow whoever you want. But the truth is, paths get locked out. So you might follow an episode or two with one character, and then their timeline basically dead ends. And then you play as a different character, and then they do something, and then multiple other timelines unlock for other characters. So you're kind of just bouncing around, which I like. A lot of popular and successful TV shows will do this, where they just change the perspective over the course of the show. And it keeps everything fresh, so you don't get stale just following one character the whole time. So following these characters, and they're all very different from one another, you gradually unlock the mysteries of what's going on in this game.
I think an interesting choice that's been made here is that, unlike most, I don't say most visual novels nowadays, but a lot of them, there's voice acting. There's deliberately no voice acting here.
Yeah, and I'm still unsure how I feel about voice acting. Like, I always get initially excited when a game has voice acting, because to a degree I could just kind of sit back, relax, and I don't have to follow all the reading and, tax my brain following paragraphs of text. And someone who's very good at voice acting can kind of just feed it to me, spoon feed it to me. But at the same time, in a game like this, I almost feel like it would take something away from the game if I had all of the lines read out loud to me, because I like to, come up with my own voices for the characters, and they're so unique from one another that I get to invest myself a little more personally by digesting the text as I want to take it in. And the other reason why this is important is because whether there's voice acting or not, you're going to have to do a lot of reading anyway, because this game is lore heavy, and not just lore in terms of the fictional universe we're in. It's also extremely lore heavy in terms of drawing on actual Japanese history, drawing on actual Japanese folklore and occult literature. And it basically says, what if? What if all this folklore is true? The Paranormal Affairs Bureau exists as a kind of like secret police to deal with these fantastical situations that are occurring in real life Japan. So it's kind of just food for anyone who's a little more academic, who's kind of a history buff, where you get to enjoy these ideas of, hey, 500 years ago, we don't know what happened at this battle or what this ruler was doing during these periods of their rule. What if they were actually invading an island and, capturing mermaids so that they could gain eternal life? Like, these are fun ideas for anyone who's a little more heady to take in. But if you're not even into the academic side of things, you could just take the story for face value and be along for the ride of the mystery and finding out what's going to happen to these teenagers, what's going to happen to the fantasy author. And it's fantastic from that perspective as well.
That actually reminds me of a game I played a few months ago, the Seance of Blake Manor, where there's a library and there's a library, and you can go into the library and there are just like dozens and dozens of books that, while they don't have anything directly to do with the story, they are filled with like Irish folk literature and the supernatural. And by reading them, you get additional context and insight into the events that are happening in the game. But if you don't want to, you don't need to. Mm-hmm. I love when there's that kind of option to the game. You can engage as much as you want.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who play CRPGs get that from like a purely fictional perspective, like high fantasy. Like if you're into the Divinity universe or the Pillars of Eternity universe, like there's boundless lore you could just read that tells you about the in-game's history. But there's something to a game like Paranormasight where you can actually read real historical texts, or at least someone's interpretation of these historical texts made for the game world. And then it kind of whets your palate, like, hey, this is an introduction. If you want to learn more about this, Oda Nobunaga was a real ruler. You could actually learn more about what he was really doing. And Yoshitaka, what was he doing? He was someone who worked with Oda Nobunaga. If these characters interest you based on the little taste of history you got in the game, you just go to a library, pull up some articles online. You can actually do a deeper dive. And I find that incredibly engrossing, because this world is not just a fictional universe. It's also drawing on a real history.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different kinds of, I guess, if you're setting something in the quote unquote real world, there's so many different ways you can go. You can go alternate history where things are completely different. You can do fictional history where certain events happen. I always like unseen history where there are actual historical events, but you get a quote additional context that is fictional that provides this additional texture to the real world.
I agree completely. And that's what this game does. And I think it works so well because a lot of ancient history, or even history that's multiple hundreds of years old, there's always holes in history, right? Who's writing the history is usually the victor, right? So, and who was able to write? It was mostly people in the ruling class, so the common person wasn't able to write historical texts about what was actually happening. So the game poses the question of, what if there was an island that sank beneath the waves because of a supernatural curse? Who would be writing about it? Well, not the ruling class. It would have to be the people who lived in the area, but the people who lived in the area may not have been literate. So I think, again, if you're a history buff and you're thinking about this, like, oh, access to writing, access to reading, who's able to actually document that these things happened or didn't happen? So it's fun to kind of like sit back, fantasize, and think about like, oh, these gaps in our history, like you were saying, like, how could we explain these gaps in history? And what if this stuff actually did happen?
One thing that we should tell the audience is, okay, there are a lot of different kinds of video game fans out there. And some like, fast-paced stuff. And even for visual novels, some people really like fast-paced stuff. This is a pretty slow-paced visual novel. It's a 20-hour game with nice, slow pacing. So how does that keep the momentum of the game up and keep the player, well, you, engaged throughout the narrative?
So it's tricky, right? So if you're going to write a game that's a little bit dry and a little bit on the slower side, you got to keep players interested somehow, right? So there's lots of little different tricks that designers and developers use to do that. Like I referenced earlier, you're changing perspective a lot. So if you're kind of like, you like these characters, but you've kind of heard enough from these detectives, the game's going to punch you over to, the teenagers again. And all the characters are very distinct from one another. So even though the plot is moving at a much slower pace than maybe some people are used to, the characters are enjoyable to just listen to or read, I guess, because their dialogue, their personalities are so different. And there's constant mystery. There's several mysteries in this game. And right in the beginning, the mystery is, why does Yuza want to find a mermaid? That's mystery number one. And then he ends up going to an island where he used to live after a tragic accident where his mother and father and a bunch of other people on this island died from like this giant storm. When he lands at this island, he realizes no one there really likes his deceased mother. They speak very ill of her, even though she's passed. And he's like, why don't they like my mom? Turns out they blame her for the tragic accident that happened at sea. And then this happens very early in the game. And then, I mean, these are two big questions. Like, okay, that's speaking so ill of the dead. But everyone seems very angry and upset about it. Why? He wants to find a mermaid. Why? And then we meet more characters with their own desires and their own reasons for wanting to find a mermaid. Like, okay, what is going on? Why does everyone care about mermaids? And then it just gradually gives you a little bit of more mystery and some answers over time. Some of the bigger mysteries it saves for the second half of the game, but you get enough over time, like a little piece of candy, and then it just gives you enough to keep you going because you're satisfied, you're getting some answers. They're not just keeping you in the dark about everything. And then they gradually introduce new mysteries. So it's like, even though it's a slower pace, they're giving you a little bit at a time to keep you going. And it's wonderful rather than smacking you in the face with like the shock thing or the like this gruesome thing happened or wow, I can't believe this character did that. It's less fantastical and it makes it feel more realistic. So if you're someone who wants to take in this fantasy game, this magical, realistic world, at face value, it feels realistic. Like some of the stuff could really be happening. And that makes it enjoyable because you could just entertain these ideas or these fantasies in a world that very much feels like our own.
It's a little bit less horror focused, you say, than the original. You said the first had quite a few scares. This game still has a few, but like not as many.
Yeah, and that was a surprise to me. I love horror. I love horror movies. If it's scary, I'm into it, and I allow myself to be scared. So I love horror video games. I allow myself to feel tense. I don't put up a tough front and try and outbrave the game. And I was kind of hoping this game would be scary, but I have no complaints because while this game kind of departs from the first in terms of some of the eerie imagery or in some of the audio horror and some of the, oh no, look behind you sort of stuff. I think the fact that it's a cult and kind of creepy-ish is enough. Like it still felt a little bit tense, but I never felt like, oh my God, there's a ghost that's going to pop out of this house. Or like, if I go into this dark room, there's going to be a scary face. Like it's nothing like that. But like the instrumentation is eerie and not like, there's no like sudden like, ba-ba. It just kind of
jump scare kind of game.
It's not a jump scare kind of game, but it keeps like this eerie sort of feel throughout the game. The only time it doesn't feel really eerie is during the daytime. But when night falls, it gets pretty spooky. But at no point are you going to be like sweating or worrying about who's behind you in your room while you're at your computer. It's nothing like that.
Aside from the pacing, there's also puzzles that are present throughout it because I guess it's a visual novel, but there are puzzles, but it's not necessarily a puzzle game or an adventure game style puzzles. They're not designed like as gatekeepers for the progression. Right. What kind of puzzles are these?
So a lot of it is binary choices. I mean, this is primarily a visual novel, but you will have some choices that are, you could choose this or this dialogue option. And the vast majority of the time, no matter what you pick, you're going to be on this linear path in the story. So don't feel like you're going to have like 5 different ways you could play the game. They'll give you some bad endings, but that's by design. Like you can't avoid the bad ending. And then there's going to be points in the game where they'll ask you an open-ended question. Like you got to type in the answer, like who is the person who is likely this? And then you have to like go into your files and reread the historical text that they gave you to find out. Like it's almost like a pop quiz for a history class.
How edutainment like.
Exactly. And, to me, I think it's kind of like it's not the best game design, but it gave me an opportunity to reread some of these historical texts, and I was retaining more of the information by virtue of doing it, which is kind of the point of a class, right? Like you study for the test, so you have to reread the material, and so you retain the information. So as far as edutainment's concerned, and I wrote this in the review, I think this is maybe the single best use of edutainment I've ever seen playing a video game. And there's a lot of games that will they'll want to teach you something first and then base the game around it. I think this is one of the situations where they got a game and they put it in some real historical context using, occult folklore that maybe a lot of people, especially in the West, don't know about. And to engross yourself in this world, you kind of need to learn real history and learn about real folklore. And it's the single best example of it being done right. Because if more games did this, I would be all about it, because it's one thing to learn about the Pillars universe, which I adore. And it's another to learn about real history. So you feel like you're really getting something out of this game besides just enjoyment.
Neat. We're going to wrap this up in a second, but I really wanted to ask you about, okay, there is a distinct lack of traditional gameplay here. And you say that's it's a core drawback to the overall experience. It's actually a criticism you had with the original game as well. So there's not a ton of interactivity. It's a visual novel. So what are your main takeaways from that in terms of I guess just in terms of how you quote unquote play the game?
So we're in a day and age where choices matter, right? That's like a buzzword, and everyone likes to criticize, well, your choices don't really matter. Or yeah, they do matter because it kind of changes the overall experience of the game. I kind of just take games at face value. I don't get too bent out of shape of whether or not your choices matter. When I write these reviews, I'm drawing mostly from my perspective, but I try and also take into consideration other people who might be reading the review who want this to be a choices matter game. If you look at some of the screenshots, you look at some of the videos, you might see multiple characters with multiple different timelines, and you get the impression like, oh, I can decide how I want to play the game. Not really the case here. And like I said in the review, I think that's probably a good thing. I actually really enjoy linear titles because the writers and the developers don't have to worry about multiple different routes. So they could just focus all of their effort on one user experience, which I think typically results in a better told story. So, I think for some it's a drawback. I know I put that in my review as a drawback. It's linear. I personally am fine with it. To me, if it's open-ended, fine. If it's linear, fine. Just make a good game. That's all I care about.
And you are really wanting another entry in this series.
Oh my God, yes. And I know I wrote in the review, like, can we have another one in less than 3 years? But honestly, I'm one of those people who's like, take all the time you need. If it's going to take another 3 years to make a fantastic title like this in the Paranormasight universe, take all the time you need. If it takes 4 years, that's fine too. But I definitely want to see more of this series.
The visual style that I'm looking at here, and obviously the world building, this could lend itself extremely well to. Well, you said that there are scares in the first game, and there are some here, but you could lean really more heavily into a horror focus with this to genuinely scare the crap out of the audience, or you could go the complete other way and really just make it into a much more, I guess, edutainment experience.
Yeah, I mean, they can do whatever they want with it. I mean, I think a lot of times, they're testing the waters. Like, hey, let's try moving in this direction, see how people respond to it. I mean, Resident Evil is probably the best series to, pose the example to. I mean, it was started out horror with some action, and then it went hardcore into action, less scares, and then it went back into horror. So, if they want to make the next game a horror fest, make it Layers of Fear kind of scares, fantastic. I'm sure they're going to do it right. I mean, they've earned their stripes at this point.
Cool. Well, I really, really think this game looks like something special. I heard such great things about the first game. I was looking at my I use a site called GG Deals to track game prices on various storefronts. Great site if anyone is looking to save some cash. And both Paranormasights are on my wish list. Weirdly, the first one's not on sale right now, which I was like, that seems like a slightly missed opportunity, guys. You probably could have sold a couple of games.
These are fairly cheap games, though, in general, just because they're probably not big budget titles. Because, I mean, it's mostly just still images on the page.
Yeah, they're not like indie titles, but they're also not like, I guess, Final Fantasy VII Remake level. Certainly not that level. Yeah. Anyway, okay, let's move on now to something that's a very different kind of game. And that is, we're going to go to an indie Zelda-like now. And this game is called Under the Island. So it's a 2D action adventure RPG. It's a Zelda-like. There's a German indie team, Slime King Games. And it was released a few weeks ago. And like I said, it's very explicitly a Zelda-like, pulling heavy inspiration from Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, specifically the SNES era, whether or not it's been on the SNES, but like this era of Zelda game. So, Ben, you reviewed this a few weeks ago, and you really thought it was a pretty good example of a Zelda-like done right, because there are a lot of Zelda-likes out there and they're just terrible. And this one actually does a lot right.
Yeah. I enjoyed my time with the game. There's definitely some flaws, especially with like the combat and some of the storytelling and writing and that sort of thing. But what this game really nails very well is the like world design, the puzzle design, the dungeon design. It has some really unique ideas that aren't just relying on, kind of nostalgia or ideas that have already been done before in Zelda or in similar games. So those are things I thought that made it kind of stand out compared to a lot of the, indie Zelda likes that we see. So I wouldn't quite put it on the level of like Tunic or something like that, which I think is like kind of the high bar for this, indie Zelda-like game, but it's a lot better than the average one that comes out for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, Tunic is a Zelda-like in terms of its style and perspective and things like that. But realistically speaking, it's very much it pulls a lot of DNA from Souls, whereas this is just very clearly an homage to 16-bit classic 2D Zelda. Like I said. So really interesting and simple setup. It's the character of Nia. It takes place modern day, so it's not like a fantasy title in the traditional Zelda. It's a character named Nia moves to a remote island with her scientist parents to study its history, which I have to admit reminds me a little bit of Star Tropics in terms of like the modern setting, the island hopping, that kind of thing. Yeah,
it definitely has a bit of that vibe, similar vibe to Star Tropics. And that's nice because it does make it feel a little bit different from Zelda. And then they do a lot of like little tongue-in-cheek kind of things, like attempts at humor. And some of those I think land, like poking fun at the conventions of Zelda and then how it kind of doesn't go with that. So for example, early on, you fall down into these catacombs and you have to make your way out. And then, there's this ancient member of the civilization down there. And he's like, the island is sinking. And if you don't find these like 4 gears, then the island will sink. And Nia obviously doesn't want that to happen. So she's like, okay, like I'll do this. He's like, and there's this legendary sword to help you on your quest. And then she goes to get the sword and the sword's already been taken by somebody. Who knows when that happened. And they left a hockey stick in its place. And so that's what you use instead of a sword. So stuff like that is kind of like cute and funny. They're kind of poking fun at the conventions of the genre and doing something a little different with it. And that stuff tends to land, I think, pretty well.
I have to admit it, as backhand compliments go, there are some attempts at humor is one of the...
I think that's something that's very difficult in a game to do well is humor. And this kind of gets into the issues with the storytelling and the writing in this game is that there's a lot of like it does, I think, something that a lot of indie games do, especially debut games. And I do think this is the first game from this studio where they have a lot of like ideas for story And then that means the game has like a lot of dialogue or a lot of text in general, but then that it's not very purposeful all the time. So you have a lot of characters that say a lot of things, but they're not really saying much. They're using a lot of words to say very little. And most of the dialogue is more perfunctory, like it's telling you where to go next or what to do. And there's not really a lot of characterization and development with the dialogue, which, it's not a huge problem with a game like this. I don't even really think that the Zelda game, the actual Zelda games are the best with their storytelling and characterization.
Certainly not the 2D Zeldas. They are very much reliant on the atmosphere of the world that you're in with some connective dialogue, but there's not like a massive... Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past is one of my all-time favorite games. But if you do not pay attention to the crawl when you start it up, you're not going to know what's happening. And it's not really all that important.
Yeah, and I would say it's similar here. The actual story is not really all that important. It's just that characters have a lot of text that they're going to say to you, and then it doesn't really amount to anything more important than what you would get in one of the old school Zeldas. And so that's a little bit unfortunate. But it's not a huge issue. I think the pacing of the game is done really well. And what they've really done is I think of the Zelda titles that it draws inspiration from, I think it draws the most inspiration from Link's Awakening, where you're given this, pretty smaller, self-contained area.
It's an island.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's an island. Yep. And they layer a lot of details and little secrets to find and things like that very, very well in each screen. So I think there's like a total of, I want to say there's like 40, 50, distinct areas total. And each of those areas is more than just like a screen as it would be in like Link's Awakening, obviously, but they kind of fit in that same structure. And there's so much to find and discover. I mean, the sense of exploration in this game is really, really good. And I think that's what they nailed more than anything. And I think that is in a lot of ways the most important aspect of a Zelda style game to nail is the idea that you can go anywhere you go. And if you pay attention and look around, there are interesting things to find and interact with. And then as you progress and get more abilities and tools, then you can go back to these areas and find something unique and interesting or helpful. And this game always has that. So there's always multiple different things to find in every area. It's creative use of the tools that you get in the dungeons and then combining those tools with other tools in the overworld to like get secrets and rewards and things like that. It does a lot of that, and it does a lot of that really well.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some of the screenshots. I love the points you're making. It doesn't look too busy, but it doesn't look vacant either. And I think that's such a difficult balance to strike with a lot of level design in a game like this. And it's something I love about Crosscode too, which is my favorite games of all time. So I'm really vibing with everything you're saying here.
Yeah, and I think that is the thing that they definitely like knocked out of the park, is just having a really detailed world with a lot of secrets to uncover, but not making it feel overly busy or artificial. Like it feels cohesive and it feels very like, not necessarily realistic, but it feels like a real place.
Ecosystem.
And yes, exactly. And you get that real sense of place from it. And it's very intuitive, the way things are laid out, the way secrets are hidden, the way puzzles are put into the world. And so it just encourages you to explore. And so that's what I spent most of my time doing in the game, is just exploring and uncovering different things. And I think that really keeps you going. There was never a point where I was like bored or too lost or didn't know how to progress. Like it keeps those little breadcrumbs going in the world. And then there's always some other thing that you can pursue, even if it's a side content and not part of the like main quest. And usually those things will lead back into being useful for progression. So it's very tightly designed in that way in terms of the level design. And I think that just makes it stand above the typical Zelda inspired indie game for sure.
Earlier, you mentioned the hockey stick, and the combat here it's mixed from what you've said, specifically because a hockey stick is not as effective as a sword, really, which means that you are fairly weak, I guess, throughout most of the game because you're fighting with a hockey stick instead of an ancient or amazing weapon. And you also said there's not a lot of defensive options like a dodge roll, a shield, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that kind of hurts the, I guess, the combat quite a bit.
Yeah, I would say the combat's definitely the weakest aspect of this game, and that's twofold, right? You first, the problem that you just mentioned, that you don't have any defensive options. So, in a typical Zelda game, the older ones, you have a shield to deflect incoming projectiles or deflect blows from the enemy. And then in other games, you might have like a dodge roll or a dash or something like that allows you to kind of get out of the way of enemies. And this game really doesn't have either of those things. It doesn't have anything that really approximates either of those things. And so what that means is that, when you're in combat scenarios, you can attack and then you can kind of run around, and then that's all you can really do. And they like to put in a lot of like multiple enemies in a particular location. And so you really constantly just having to kite enemies around, and it doesn't give you a lot of opportunities to strike. And then what complicates that or makes this kind of the combat experience even worse is that enemies just have a lot of health and you don't do very much damage. So I think one thing that like classic Zelda really gets right is that most enemies die in just a few hits, right? And so, there's not really a lot of depth or a lot of mechanics to the combat in early Zelda titles, but that simplicity is kind of to its benefit. And so,
unless you're incredibly bad at the game, you're probably not going to go down to a moblin.
Right, exactly. And it's just a few strikes of your sword. It's more like timing based. And when you have an opening, you can kind of attack, and it makes it, so that combat is satisfying, but without really being like a drag. And that's, I think, what this game misses, is that enemies have a lot of health. They have big health bars. It could take you 10 strikes to kill like a regular enemy, especially at the beginning of the game. And that's just really, really, just the enemies are just very spongy. And then that's just not very satisfying, especially when there's just not a lot to the combat mechanics otherwise.
Yeah. Speaking of that, something that Zelda, I think, excels in at the best of times is their boss fights. Really, you often have to use the tool that you find in that dungeon in a very specific way, and then it opens it. But here you say that the boss encounters are quite unique because oftentimes they're not even fights at all.
Yeah. So this is, I think, one of the game's strengths is that they get really creative with the puzzle design in the dungeons and then the boss encounters as well. So, some of the items that you get in this game are more standard. Like you get this plant that shoots a fireball that's a lot like the fire wand. And then you get bombs, right? So just those are like mainstay kind of Zelda items. But you also get some really unique and interesting items. Like you get these animal treats that you can like lay out as kind of a breadcrumb trail to lure not even enemies, animals in the environment to then do certain things. So you might need like a ram to run into a tree to knock something out of it, or you might need to move a cow onto a pressure plate on the floor. And then there's also another item that you get later that's like this bird companion that you can, position with the right stick and shoot out into the distance independent from you. And it can hit switches or grab items for you. And so these are really kind of unique twists on a typical like Zelda item. And then the game uses those really effectively with boss fights. So one of the early boss fights, you're actually, it's not a combat encounter at all. There's this character who's like an opera singer, and she's trying to put on a stage play. And so she's like, oh, but there's all these technical problems going wrong behind the scenes. And so you have to like basically whack the boiler to make it, function properly. And so that's one phase of the fight. And then you go up into the rafters to handle the lighting. And so you're moving on these moving platforms and lighting these lanterns with the fire ball plant that you have to keep the stage lit from overhead. And then on the third phase, you have to go down and you're backstage, and there's all these fans that are trying to rush the stage because they're just like so enamored with the opera singer, and you have to beat them away with your hockey stick. So it's like, that is like it's a very unique. And
in that particular case, you're lucky you actually don't have a sword, because that could get messy.
Yes, exactly. And so it kind of has that light tone to it, right? There are some parts where there's more, it is more combat oriented, but they kind of play around with the concept of like, what even is a boss fight? How do you frame a boss fight? How can you make something interesting without it being explicitly like a combat scenario? And they do a lot of really interesting things with that. There's some later bosses as well. There's one really interesting set piece where you're actually participating in a cooking competition. And so that's another way that they've kind of like taken the idea of this like climactic boss fight and then kind of remixed it into something totally new and different that a lot of games in the style wouldn't do. And also that isn't necessarily reliant on combat, which ends up working in the game's favor because the combat itself isn't that interesting. But these situations are actually a lot more interesting. And they're kind of like a fusion between, puzzle solving, boss fight, and just like a contained set piece. And that also, draws on the kind of change in setting as well. So, they can bring in concepts that are a little more modern, a little more close to, real life, and then have it still fit with the tone and construction of the world that they've created. And so that's something that I really enjoyed about the game, and I think definitely sets it apart from other games in the genre.
How is the music here?
Oh, the music is excellent. That was another thing that I really came away from enjoying. There's a lot of music here that, particularly like the one in the main town, the music really evokes like Outset Island from Wind Waker, but it puts its kind of own spin on it. So it doesn't feel like a copy. And then there's a lot of variety in the music. So there's many different biomes on the island. There's like kind of a desert region. There's the beach area. There's like the more forested, wooded area. And there's like a snowy mountain area as well. And the music does a really great job of kind of, going across many different genres and kind of matching the theme and atmosphere of the location that you're in. And they use a lot of different instruments and a lot of different musical styles. And I like too that it's very much like a modern musical score. It's not going for that chiptune kind of style of music and composition, which I don't mind. I like that style of music in a lot of games, but that's just something that a lot of like retro kind of throwback indie games do. And I appreciated that this game didn't fall into that and tried to kind of create its own unique atmosphere and audio visual presentation.
It's also not a super long game, which is, in my opinion, not a bad thing at all. It's only about, what do you say, about 8 to 10 hours?
Yeah, it's about 8 to 10 hours. And that it took me about that amount of time. And I was doing a lot of like hunting for secrets and doing the side content as well. So if you want to go in and kind of explore and hunt around, you can be in and out within, I would say like 10 hours and see pretty much all the game has to offer. And I like that too. It's not an expensive game, and it doesn't wear out its welcome. I think a lot of the mainline Zelda titles, especially the later 3D ones, are really, really padded in terms of runtime. And you're doing a lot of like fetch quest style stuff that isn't really that fun and feels like they're just trying to stretch the game out to like 40 hours. And this game has none of that. So it's just short and sweet. Everything that you do is, it has a purpose, and it's fun and it's engaging, and you never feel like anything drags.
Ben, you talked about this game has sold me on it. Like, I went from being like, whatever, to like, oh my God, I got to play this game. I love the way you've spoken about it. I have a question. So I have a 7-year-old who is starting to show an interest in games. Do you think this is the kind of game that would click with her?
I love this question.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Bob. I think, I think so. I think, it is definitely drawing on some like familiarity with like Zelda style games, but I think it does a really good job of like not being overly reliant on that understanding to like get into the game. And there's a lot of things in here that, of course, it's pulling from Zelda, but are also very like just intuitive in general. So like pushing blocks to like make a path, or putting a bomb on a cracked wall, those things I think are very intuitive, even if you haven't seen that design language in a game before. A younger child might not have. And there's nothing here that's like content wise that I would think would be not suitable for kids. It's very approachable. There's nothing too scary. There's nothing too like adult or anything like that. But it also doesn't really hold your hand, overly tutorialize or hold your hand. You can kind of like just explore and hunt around and poke at the kind of corners of the world. And I think that's something kids really like to do, is kind of get lost in a place and kind of just see what happens. And the game has a lot of interactive elements like that. So yeah, I think kids would really, really enjoy it.
Something that this game is doing that I actually genuinely really quite appreciate is that, unlike let's just take some of the Nintendo original genres, whether they be the side-scroller Mario game or Metroidvanias, or I guess Metroid games at that stage of the game. There are countless Metroidvanias now. There are countless side-scrollers. Too many, in effect. There are 3D Zelda as well. Like pretty much anything that has that perspective has been inspired by, 3D Zelda has greatly influenced it. There are surprisingly few games out there that are actually 2D Zelda-likes to a certain quality. Off the top of my head, I can only think of like Blossom Tales is one. I guess depending on the quality, Evoland. I think Evoland 2 sucks, but Evoland 1's pretty good. A game called It'll Do. Crosscode, obviously, which is, you're right, Bob. It's just, oh God, Crosscode.
That is a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, it's so good. I can't wait for its spiritual successor. Yes. But like, I love the fact that they're actually doing something. 'Cause I love 2D Zelda. I love it so much. And whenever I see something that looks good like this, I'm like, oh yeah, I bet that would hit the spot.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the, games that are kind of inspired by 2D Zelda, like a lot of them, they're maybe a little more linear, or they're a little more combat focused, or they're, things like that. Whereas, the real joy and like engagement, I think, from those classic Zelda titles is really like exploration, puzzle solving. It has some of those other elements, but giving you this kind of big area to kind of poke around in and find secrets and do things like that. And this game really focuses on that. And so I think in that way, it feels a lot more akin to classic Zelda than a lot of the other games that are kind of inspired by classic Zelda, but do something else. So I think if you really enjoy the kind of structure of like Link's Awakening or A Link to the Past, then this game is definitely pulling from that same design philosophy for sure.
I'm sending a link in the chat here to both of you because I saw this online, and this actually gives me a perfect excuse to talk about it. So a few years ago, I reviewed the Link's Awakening remake for Switch. Really loved it. I love Link's Awakening so much. One of the things that it did is it got rid of the screen scrolling in the overworld, and it's much more open world. There is now a obviously illegal, unofficial PC port of Link's Awakening, specifically the Game Boy Color version. I don't know if either of you click on the link and check it out, but it's, oh my God, it looks so good. It's like it's widescreen now. It's the entire screen of the island as you're walking around. There's no more screen scrolling. It looks amazing.
This is incredible. It's what blows me away is how much just a different camera can really enhance a game.
Yeah, I want to play this, and I will actually at some point.
Yeah, this is outstanding.
Yeah, it looks so good because it's a very similar perspective as the remake in the way that the camera's moving. You see the entire island. The only drawback I found to that approach in the remake was that it made the island feel much smaller than it did when you were doing the screen scrolling. For some reason, the screen scrolling, the time it took you to do that made the world feel larger. So I suspect that this island specifically is going to feel real small. But holy crap, it looks good.
I imagine the zoomed out perspective also does that too, right? Like you're seeing more of the world at once. And so, it just means like, oh, well, the world's actually a lot smaller than I remember because you can just see so much of it at once in a way where you couldn't before. Yeah.
So obviously the people listening can't see what we're looking at right now. Just look it up online. It's Link's Awakening DX HD. YouTube would be a great place to look at just some footage from it. Oh my God, it looks so pretty. I just love it so much.
When you get screen transitions, it can feel a little claustrophobic and can make a place seem bigger than it really is. When you can see over the wall and see like a different biome, I think it makes it just feel smaller.
Yeah, a little more like a diorama. And that's kind of funny because that's also like the style they went with for the Link's Awakening remake too, right? Like they, went with that kind of diorama-esque art style, I think, because they realized when you pull it back and you don't have the screen transitions, that's kind of how the world feels. And so they kind of leaned into that. And that's what I'm kind of getting from this as well. Yeah.
I mean, it's the Game Boy Color game. As far as I can tell, it's a perfect recreation of it. It's just PC. They've been doing this with a lot of Nintendo games lately. Just fans have been creating PC versions of it. I know that Super Mario 64 has one that has like HD textures and it was a decompiled version of the actual game, and it's gained quite a bit of popularity online. But this thing looks amazing. Even though the world might feel pretty small, I adore Link's Awakening. So actually, I'm going to take that to transition to what I'm going to talk about very briefly, which is, speaking of, okay, this is a small world, but I'm going to talk about a game that has a massive world, which is technically not in our coverage, but I just enjoyed it too much not to. I finished Silksong a couple of days ago, Hollow Knight Silksong. So I love Hollow Knight. I played it many years ago now, and when it first came out, and I thought it's one of the best Metroidvanias I've ever played. It has the best atmosphere of a world that I've ever played. I love this world so much. And Silksong infamously started out as a DLC of Hollow Knight and evolved into its own game, and then kept evolving for like 6 years. And as everyone knows, it came out a few months ago. I don't want to talk about it a great deal because, again, it's not really in our coverage. I just adored it. I just loved it. I do think I liked Hollow Knight a little bit more, but that's an unfair comparison. And I personally can't stand when it's like, it's not quite as good as the original. It's like, well, yeah, but it's still really, really good. And it's approaching the original. It's almost as good.
I got to ask. Is this as hard as everyone claims? Have they patched that, made it easier? I know the first game wasn't terribly difficult, and that seems to be more this game's
Really?
vibe. I didn't think it was that difficult.
I thought Hollow Knight's quite difficult. I beat the game. There's no difficulty options, obviously. You walk in, the game is the game. There are significant issues with this game design, and it drives me crazy. And I know it drives the internet nuts as well. I can't think of a game that has driven the internet quite as crazy as Silksong, because for every brilliant game design decision that is made in this, and there are countless ones, there are some just game design decisions that arguably, I guess the team at Team Cherry would say that friction is one of the things that makes the games good. But there are points where it's not just friction, it's just pointless backtracking or like runbacks that are so unnecessary that they make your teeth hurt, like that aren't even difficult. Like if you have a gauntlet, for example, to get to the boss, and the gauntlet is part of the boss, then I totally understand why you would need a run back. That's part of it. But oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes there's just a boss and the closest bench is like 5, 6, 7 minutes away from it. And it's not a gauntlet. It's just basically running through back to it. I did something that I thought I would never do. After playing it for about 15 hours, I downloaded a mod. And I recommend anyone who's going to play Silksong, try it first as it comes, and then maybe download a mod. And the mod doesn't change the difficulty. It doesn't make anything easier. It's the exact same game. All it does is that when you die to a boss, you restart in the boss's area. So it eliminates runbacks. Oh my God, it improved my enjoyment of the game just immeasurably. Immeasurably. Otherwise, it was the same game it always was. It's still as hard as you'd expect, Bob. Some bosses are better than others. Some bosses are brilliant, and some bosses are just cheap. And you want to throw your controller not because it's hard, but because you're like, this just sucks.
Yeah.
Baffling design choices mixed with the most brilliant design choices I've ever seen, mixed with some of the most gorgeous art and brilliant music. It is genuinely it's an astonishing game. Absolutely astonishing. And while I do believe that the difficulty is a necessary part of Hollow Knight and Silksong, I would not recommend downloading a mod to change the difficulty. Using a mod to get rid of some of the friction that is there that doesn't contribute to the overall experience and in fact detracts from it, I would suggest you do so. Modding it is super easy. Just go to Nexus. There's a guide there. It's not even remotely as difficult as, like, for example, Fallout. It's a much more simpler modding style.
Play how you want to play.
Yeah, totally play how you want to play. I think you should play how you want to play. I do think that you should try the original version before you play how you want to play. My opinion is always do the original intent, play the original intent. And then if you reach a point where you're like, this isn't working for me, at that point, I think you can play as you want to play if you want to continue the experience. And I did. And it was hard. But I beat it. I beat it 100. I got 100%. I got all the items, everything. Geez, I just loved it. Anyway, sorry. I wanted to talk about it briefly because it was a big story a few months ago. And if anyone's waiting to play it, if anyone played Hollow Knight and hasn't played Silksong yet, absolutely play Silksong. If you haven't played Hollow Knight yet, just play Hollow Knight. Hollow Knight is one of the greatest Metroidvanias ever made. It's astonishing.
I've been eyeing Silksong for a while, so maybe soon.
Yeah, it's real good. I really, really like it. And actually, Hornet is a much more interesting character than the Knight. Obviously, the Knight doesn't.
I believe that.
The Knight is intentionally, literally an empty right. suit, right. Whereas Hornet is a character who has lived for many, 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 many years and has quite a personality, and it's just wonderful. Oh my god, it's just wonderful. Anyway, let's go from talking about something delightful into something that sucks. So the discussion question today, we're not going to talk about this at great length, but it is two pretty big stories happened in the last 2 weeks. Actually, that's not true. An awful lot of really terrible stories happened in the last 2 weeks. These two just happen to be about video games. So a few years ago, Sony acquired Bluepoint Games, who were masters of the remaster. Their remasters were unparalleled of a variety of different classic PS3 era games, and Sony Interactive Entertainment closed it. And people lost their collective and my God, they had a good reason to. It's everything that I can't stand about the industry. It's taking a independent studio that is doing astonishing work, putting it under your corporate umbrella, and just your own corporate mismanagement screwing it. And then to the point where it folds. And what's really crazy about it is there's some additional information came out from Jason Schreier a couple of days ago, where apparently they did actually want to work on a Bloodborne remake. And I guess FromSoft told them no, which could indicate that FromSoft is going to be doing something with Bloodborne. But I have a really hard time believing there are so many classic PS3 games that could have amazing remakes. The fact that Sony closed them, I almost feel like there has to be something else to the story that we don't know about, because otherwise it's just like, what the hell are you? That's a baffling decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I mean, this is kind of something Sony has been, I mean, this has been going on with Sony for a really long time. I would say, if you go all the way back to like 2013 to 2016, with the launch of the PS4 and the early PS4 years, they did a lot of studio closures back then. They closed Studio Liverpool, who worked on the Wipeout series. They closed Evolution Studios, who made the MotorStorm series and Drive Club. Then they closed Gorilla Cambridge, who worked on Killzone Mercenaries for the Vita, the Medieval series, and some VR games. And they, they also closed Zipper Interactive, who had worked on the SOCOM series and some other titles. So that was like really the first, major blow to their first party back then, when they that they had kind of built up over the PS2 and PS3 years. And then, they had this kind of strategy under Jim Ryan, where they were really heavily pursuing like games as a service, live service multiplayer games.
That worked out great for them. Just fantastic.
Yeah. Which has really, really not worked out, because they ended up canceling like half of them, maybe more than half of them, before they ever saw the light of day. A few of them either did come out or were announced, but then were canceled, like Concord infamously, or the Last of Us multiplayer that never, that was rumored and even, I think, kind of referenced by Naughty Dog, but never actually was playable to the public. They've just been going through this very strange kind of major shifts in strategy with like first party development. without anything actually really panning out from those initiatives. And yeah, they just kind of seem like rudderless and lost with what their plan is, what they're going to do. I mean, they'd had a lot of success with these kind of cinematic third person action adventure kind of games. And it seems like they're still doing some of that. You know, Insomniac's working on a game like that. Santa Monica is working on another game like that, presumably. You know, Ghost of Yotei just came out from Sucker Punch, which is also in that kind of line. So some of their studios are still doing stuff like that. But then the other studios, you know, they're closing studios. The biggest one, I think, would have been Japan Studio, which closed in 2020. And that was one of their largest studios and one of their most prolific studios in terms of number of releases that they closed. And I think this kind of shows that shift in strategy and that kind of loss of like what they really want to focus on and what markets they're targeting. There was also a leak like a few years or maybe a year or so ago that came from when Insomniac Games was hacked. And there was a lot of like Sony financial and publishing data in that leak, which kind of revealed that some of their single player games had budgets of over $300 million, which is just really, really insane. Really, really high budgets, pouring tons and tons of money into these projects. And then, you know, the flip side of that is when you spend that much money, you know, the game has to sell tens of millions of copies to make profit. And I think they've just kind of lost, like, you know, they're chasing this really, really high profit margin thing, either with the multiplayer games or the really huge budget single player stuff. And they've kind of lost the sight of, you know, that kind of more mid-range game where you have, you know, a smaller studio, 50 to 100 people work on it, and then it sells anywhere from 1 million to 5 million copies. I mean, that's kind of what Blue Point was doing, right? And it doesn't seem like Sony's interested in that anymore.
Such a shame. But then Sony got insanely lucky because everyone was talking about Sony mismanagement at Sony Interactive Entertainment. And then I hate to use an old meme, but then Microsoft just did the whole hold my beer thing and announced that Phil Spencer is retiring as the Microsoft gaming CEO, and his second in command, Sarah Bond, the president, who many assume will be taking over, left. And in their place, we now have, and I don't want to prejudge, but I'm going to prejudge a little bit, Asha Shara, who is going to be the CEO of Microsoft Games, and the previous position that she held is the president of Core AI at Microsoft. So they put a AI person in charge of Microsoft gaming. And the line that drives me just up the goddamn wall, and I've seen countless YouTube channels, I've seen countless video game news sites quote her in her opening letter, and people are, you know, concerned that they're going to like start shoving AI into all the games. But she released a statement that said, as monetization and AI evolve and influence this future, we will not chase short-term efficiency or flood our ecosystem with soulless AI slop. Games are and always will be art, crafted by humans and created with the most innovative technology provided by us. And I've seen a lot of people online being like, no, she said that they're not going to use AI. No, she said they're not going to use soulless AI slop. I almost used a word that I probably would have had to use at least a freaking flock of chocobos to hide. These fucking people they think there's a difference between AI slop and good AI. She's saying they won't use AI slop. To me, that reads, we are going to use as much wonderful AI as possible. That's not saying they're not going to use AI. It's just
absolutely not.
You can't. That interpretation is batshit insane.
No.
They're specifically using soulless AI slop because they look online, they look on Blue Sky, they see people saying it, so they're going to say, no, it's not going to be soulless AI slop. And then the unspoken part is it's going to be great AI slop.
Well, they're going to use innovative technology, right?
It drives me insane. Like clearly this is a pivot to AI. This is like, it's not even, they're not even trying to camouflage it.
You wouldn't put her in charge of that part of the company unless you wanted to start using AI, right? Like you.
She has no experience in video games.
Right. There's absolutely no reason to hire her unless you have a plan to like more heavily use AI in the development of games, or use the same kind of business models or ideas that have influenced like generative AI technology to then influence games. Like there's just, it has to be why, otherwise it just doesn't make sense to hire her for that position. So
very much so.
Yeah.
I think another thing that drives me crazy about the current online, I know that money is one thing, and it really does you need to pay attention to it in the success level. But like, people have talked about how Microsoft is losing the console war, whatever is left of the console war, and how this is the second generation in a row that they've lost, and they might as well just close now. They might as well shut down. There's no point. They're gonna. This person was hired to sunset Microsoft gaming, and again, that drives me a little bit crazy because I'm thinking I lived through the console wars. Like, I remember them. Nintendo lost the N64 generation and the GameCube generation, and then they came out with, the Wii. So you do better next time. Like, right. There's no reason at all why they can't come roaring ahead. I understand that the market is different now. It just is. But, like, AI is not the solution to this problem. I don't even think it's necessarily a problem. Phil Spencer he made some dramatic mistakes, don't get me wrong, but not to the extent where where I think he destroyed Xbox necessarily. I think they just need one one successful thing, and they could be back on top.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is it. The whole like console war framing of it. I mean, I think they spent billions of dollars on Activision, right, and Blizzard. And so I think what that means is that they now have to become Activision or Blizzard, right? Because they haven't had the success they've wanted in the console market. And if a company like Microsoft is going to make the billions and billions of dollars of investment in a particular industry, then they need to see a return on that, right? And that's just how Microsoft has always operated. And so if they can't be the biggest player in the console space, which it's very clear at this point is not going to happen, then they're going to be the biggest third-party publisher. And in some ways, they've almost already achieved that, right? I mean, they are, with the acquisition of Bethesda, with the acquisition of Obsidian and Exile and Double Fine and Activision and Blizzard now, they pretty much are one of the biggest third-party publishers. And if you look at the revenue charts on PlayStation, most of the biggest games of any given of last year in particular were published by Microsoft. So, I think that is the direction they're moving. Xbox is kind of being phased out as a platform. I think
I don't know if you've heard, but everything's an Xbox now, Ben.
Right,
toaster
exactly.
Is an Xbox.
And that's the pivot, right? Is like, oh, well, we'll just release our games on everything, and we'll, kind of focus on being everywhere and streaming if that ever kind of gets off the ground. And I think that makes sense why they would do that. I mean, the thing that Xbox has always had, they've never been able to penetrate outside of those markets. Basically, some of Central America, North America, and then somewhat in the UK. They really have never had any success in the rest of Europe. They've never had any success in Asia, and especially not in Japan. And while Japan is not as important of a market as it used to be, Asia is an emerging market that's very important, and the rest of Europe is a very important market as well. And so I think that is also what they were looking at, is like, well, if we can't sell these things in the majority of the world, and that's where most of the growth is, then we need to change strategy. And so that makes sense. But the downside of that is that now, I think too, Activision was not what I would consider the most healthy company when they bought it. And those kind of business ideas and strategies that Activision was pursuing, I think they're inheriting a lot of that, and they're probably going to pursue a lot of similar things to that as well. So they're focusing on, Activision basically took itself from being a major publisher that published tons and tons of different releases every year, with a wide variety of studios under its wing, to funneling all of those studios into one core product that they release every year, and that's Call of Duty, right? And making, putting every studio they have on this one mega franchise, and all of the eggs in one basket, right? And so I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of the direction that Microsoft starts shifting in, is putting all of their weight behind the biggest mega hit that they can possibly come up with, and then letting all the other more creative, interesting things go by the wayside. So that's kind of how I see it going, and what I think is not great. And we've seen there's been a lot of controversy about Call of Duty in particular, incorporating AI into the game and into the cosmetics that they're selling and things like that. And to me, that's kind of a precursor of what I think they want to expand on.
See, here's my problem with AI. I was planning on doing an episode, specifically a random encounter episode, entirely about AI and AI in games early last year. And then I just got, AI just beat me to death with it. I just was like, I don't want to talk. I don't want to do that. I think I might be the most skeptical, least enthusiastic AI enthusiast of all time, because I genuinely think that the technology is magic. It does things that are astonishing, unbelievable things that would have been impossible even 3 years ago. And it's being used in the stupidest possible ways by people who are so desperate to make a profit that they are willing to destroy the idea of what AI can do in order to make a cheap dime. And I think that's the real bubble. I don't think the bubble is, obviously there's a financial bubble, but I think the bubble that's going to burst is people are going to look at it and say, oh, we don't need this because it's being used in a stupid way. And at some point, I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I think they don't know how to make it profitable, right? Like, I don't think they know how to make money off of it.
I think that it could be world changing. I really do. I think it could be world changing on the same level as the internet was. The difference, of course, the internet was not centralized and owned by 3 specific groups, but it could change everything. And it won't. It'll change everything for the worst, because the people who are in charge of it, the people who are using it, and the ways they are presenting it to the public are using it in such a cynical, horrible way that I don't think that I pray to God that people are not going to stand for it.
Well, I've been saying this for decades. Vote with your dollars. Like, you didn't want to get behind AI, don't buy Microsoft products. You don't want to get behind a company's philosophy, don't buy their games. I haven't bought a Blizzard game in over 10 years. Same thing with like food, like Chick-fil-A, vote with your dollars. That's the best thing we can do as consumers, is show them we're not going to stand for it by just not buying your games. And we can do that easily because there is a wealth of fantastic games out there. You don't need Microsoft games. You can buy anything else, support some indies, buy from Square Enix, do whatever it is you want to do. Just don't buy from companies that are using AI.
I think that's not a terrible idea. It's you vote with your dollars. The problem is that there are so many It's a little bit like pollution in the sense that, yeah, you can recycle aluminum, but that's not really going to have a massive impact. Even if everyone does the most incredible job recycling every bit of aluminum, paper, plastic that they have, it's not going to offset the amount of literal garbage that's coming from corporations that are putting into the environment. It's a little bit like that. Yeah, I'm not going to buy I'm not going to buy slop that has AI in it. But it doesn't matter, because the money that's coming in at the moment is so overwhelming that they don't need to. Like, these companies aren't even making a profit. They're not going to make a profit for many years, apparently. And the money is still coming in. That's a massive bubble, and it will pop at some point.
Yeah. And there's also the resource problem, too, is that the power generation required by the power draw required by these kind of data centers and the supercomputers or what have you that they're using to power these models just doesn't exist. And we don't have the productive capacity to produce that much energy and then also meet the needs of like everybody who just like, for electricity, regular use. Right. So that's a bubble too, right? They're just never, it just doesn't exist. They can't power it all. So eventually they're going to run up against that problem and it's not going to make money. And then the bubble will burst. Yeah.
I love the idea of there being actual innovation in nuclear technology, because the people are still using reactors that were designed in the 1950s, really. Like, I love the idea that there would be cutting edge reactors that are safer and better and more efficient. I don't want Grok running one. Yeah. Like, the idea that we're going to trust Google and X and OpenAI and Anthropic, although Anthropic has actually gotten a few points with me because of what just happened with the DOD or DOW, the Dow. Oh God, I hate that. It's so stupid. Anyway, what happened with them? And then OpenAI swooped in immediately. And I guess we've picked what Skynet's going to be. Sorry, I'm getting off topic here. This was about Phil Spencer retiring and AI apparently becoming the default mandate. My point is, when they say that we're not going to use AI slop, they don't believe that AI is inherently slop. That's the problem. Right. They don't think online, they're misusing the term. AI slop online is not being used in the term of AI slop is like pictures that have like people who have 10 fingers.
Exactly.
Or, like, that's not AI slop anymore. AI slop is literally just anything creative, quote unquote, that is generated with AI. They're not using it in that sense. They're using AI slop in the sense of output that is effectively bad or cheap. They believe that there's good AI output creatively. I don't.
They think they can blend it in. I think their big dream is they use it to make games and you're not even going to be aware of it. I think that's the entire goal.
I started using AI before a lot of people, because I was working for a marketing agency that got in right at ChatGPT 3. So I was using it, and it stole my job. But I was using it to generate like 15, 20 blogs a day. And they were terrible because especially at that point in time, the technology wasn't there yet, but they still were using it as that. So like I was rewriting AI to be good. I was rewriting AI to be, it wasn't good, but I was rewriting it to not be terrible. And I discovered that a really, really useful thing is whenever somebody says that AI can't do this, mentally, I always added the word yet. Yes, so when someone is like, AI can't write a song, I would say yet. AI can't write an actually good book yet. AI can't write a movie script yet.
It's inevitable.
Like, it's inevitable that this technology is going to reach the point where it's going to be able to create AI slop that is indistinguishable from genuine, high quality human art. That's horrific, but the question is yet. And at that point, the question is, how are we going to reestablish the definition of what art is? In terms of the world, I think that at that point, honestly, I can't believe I was thinking this. I was thinking about getting back into the theater, like with scripts and acting, simply because it's one of the only businesses that I can actually think that is AI proof, because anybody who would try to produce an AI script would immediately be blacklisted in the industry. They're live actors on stage. You can't imitate that with AI. And I was hopeful that there was going to be a real desire for authenticity from audiences as AI continued to evolve. And what I didn't see coming is that AI would evolve fast enough where the AI slop output would start becoming indistinguishable from actual art. I hate it. It's a dystopian concept that scares the living crap out of me, but it's there. Like it's already happening, and it's just going to keep getting better. And I don't know what we do at that point. So especially when she says we're not using AI slop, they're not going to be using things that are distinguishable as AI slop. They're going to be putting things in there that is indistinguishable from things that are created by a human. And at that point, you're right, Bob. You vote with your dollars. It's all you can do. The war with Iran has put me in a fairly terrible mood today.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought it would have the opposite effect.
That's fair. All
right. Well, like I said, there's a lot there's a lot of news in the world right now and in video games and everything else, and it can be overwhelming. And you can fix that by buying our stuff at our shop. This is the worst transition ever. Buy a mug. It makes everything better. Yes, so we do have a shop, www.rpgfan.com/shop. And like I said, we have mugs. You know what? Tea fixes everything has actually been a motto that I stand by. I have a cup right now.
It helps.
It helps. Mugs help with coping. A mug is the best coping strategy. A mug filled with some hot liquid is the best coping strategy you can hope for sometimes. So buy a mug. Another way you can fight the existential dread is by checking out our past episodes of Random Encounter. Jesus. Random Encounter.
Got so dark.
It really has. Last week, Audra was here to chat about Ye's 10 Proud Nordics, and Patrick came on to chat about the brand new Game Boy Color game, Infinity, which is literally a brand new Game Boy Color JRPG. And I complained about Yakuza Kiwami 3 for a whole bunch of time. So if that's of interest to you, I mean, arguably today's chat got a little darker than that, but it was pretty close. We also have Retro Encounter, and last week was the second part of the two-part episode focusing on Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade, and we have Rhythm Encounter. So there hasn't been a few episodes for a few weeks because the beginning of the year is always a train wreck, just trying to get everything set up for the rest of the year. But if you want, I really highly suggest you check out the previous episode, which was the best video game music of 2025, because there was some astonishingly beautiful music in 2025. So absolutely check that out. If you'd like to get in contact with us here at Random Encounter, you can do so by firing us off a message at podcast@rpgfan.com. I would love to hear from you if you have any ideas for future episodes, discussion questions, geopolitical analysis, I guess, of what's happening in the world. Anything you'd like to share, fire it off. If you'd like to fire me off an email, you can do so at jlogan@rpgfan.com. And you can also find me at johnologan.bluesky.social. Bob, where can we find you online?
Bob@rpgfan.com.
Cool. And Ben?
benloganlove@gmail.com.
Love that name. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends to help us get the word out there. And you can also rate us on iTunes or your other podcast player of choice. Bob, Ben, thank you so much for joining me today. I know this got a little... The first part of the episode really was... It did not foreshadow the end part of the episode.
No.
Oh my God, I'm going to need so many Chocobo sound effects. But I really appreciate both of you coming on today and chatting about all this. So yeah, thank you so much. And thank you very much for playing the games too.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jonah.
Cool. And everybody out there, thank you so much for joining us. And whatever you're playing, have fun.